Hey everybody, I thought I would give you a quick run through of the rhetorical devices that we originally looked at for the midterm, but are worth looking at quickly tonight as well. I'm just going to focus on the big idea here. This is not about memorizing the exact words that you're using. It's going to be more about just recognizing, hey, this is something that the author's doing to effectively make their point. So, alliteration. We had talked about, well, not we, but you have probably talked about that since you were in third grade or so. It's when you use the same type of sound for a consonant. Don't need to worry about that one too much. An allusion is a reference to something else. Usually it's a reference to a literary work or a historical event. If you don't know what the audience is at this point, I'm a little concerned, but that's who the text is aimed at. And remember, when we say the text, it could be a speech, it could be a letter, it could be anything. Be accurate in referring to what type of text it might be. But the audience is whoever that's aimed at. A concession is when you acknowledge that the other side actually has a point. We actually talked about this a little bit more with your argument essays. If two sides both have a rational point to make, with some strong arguments on either side, that it can actually help you to acknowledge this is not the only way of looking at this. It's certainly true that the opposing argument makes sense, or it seems appealing, or this or that. And so usually we have the concession then followed by a refutation, saying, look, this is why this is tempting, this is why they make good points, I get it, but ultimately, here's the correct argument, here's why I'm right. The Karna argument would be, again, sort of this, what would be the opposing argument to your own. For diction, the only thing I will say here is remember to be specific. Don't just say the author uses diction. Don't say that the author uses strong diction. Be precise about what sorts of words the author is using, because diction is word choice. So what I like to look at here is, what is the result of that word choice? Do they use words to provoke a particular emotion? Do they use particular words to make something seem more serious or more informal? And why is that effective? And so, again, it's more than just like they choose good words, because you could say that about anything. The more specific you can get, the better. Ethos is not ethics. Some of you guys wrote ethics previously, and I had a reminder pop up to talk about this. Ethos is not ethics, it is character. Now, ethics is a part of character, but basically when you make an ethos argument, you're saying that you should believe me because of either A, something that has already happened in terms of a reputation, a relationship, or B, the way that someone is presenting themselves. And so we can make an ethos. If someone appears to be very humble in making a request, then that would be an ethos argument. They're presenting themselves as someone who is humble, who's not demanding things. Imagery is any sensory language, and imagery is a big one to keep an eye out for, because we do see this a lot, especially when an author wants you to feel a particular emotion. I talked about, I think we both classes looked at the letter from Eliza Stacy to her father-in-law, and she mentions things like the bitter cold and having to have everyone sleep in the kitchen with the fire because the bedrooms are too cold. Imagery, seeing something, hearing something, it makes it stronger. And so keep an eye out for that. Juxtaposition would be the contrast of any two ideas. Usually it's to show the differences between something. And so when we're juxtaposing something, we're holding up two things to show the contrast. Logos would be any sort of logical appeal. We can avoid using like logos, pathos, ethos in our rhetorical analysis. We can take it a step deeper than that and talk about, so-and-so makes a logical argument by doing what? What are they actually doing to present their argument here? Metaphor and simile, you've probably been talking about since 5th grade, but every year people miss these in terms of something they could actually discuss. Keep an eye out for metaphor and simile. Metaphor would be the comparison without using like or as. Simile uses like or as. If you can find a couple of those and then explain how does this particular metaphor help prove the point, or how does this particular simile help prove the point, then that can be a really effective paragraph. Occasion would be what is happening to require this. This is usually something we're going to discuss more in the introduction as we're presenting, like, here's what's going on, here's why the author needs to make this argument in the first place. Parallelism is any sort of structure in terms of like a parallel structure for emphasis. Sometimes you'll have a speaker start a sentence the same way, or present 3 ideas in a similar fashion, sometimes even in the same sentence, to stress them just a little bit more. Pathos, we're familiar with, would be any sort of emotional appeal, but again, when we're writing our thesis, the author uses pathos, not specific enough. The author uses emotion. Which emotion are they going to be using? And even better, what are they doing to provoke that emotion? And so if we say the author uses pathos, we're being really vague. Ideally, we'd have something like, Edwards uses metaphors to provoke, I'm saying provoke too much, but to cause his audience to feel fear as they listen to him. Persona is probably not something you're going to see too much, but it's worth knowing just in case. It's the idea of being a character, of putting on a mask and presenting yourself a little bit differently, perhaps, than reality. Personification is when we give human qualities to non-human objects or to non-human things. I guess it doesn't have to be an object. It could be an idea, but I think we're familiar with that. Purpose, again, is something we want to acknowledge in our introduction. What is the author trying to do? Syntax would be the structure. It's really hard to sort of break a whole paragraph into syntax, but there you would be looking for, is there a way the author is structuring their sentences, or their order of their ideas, or, do we have, Kennedy, I'm sure you all remember this, back in December, when Kennedy was talking about like the steel prices, he had a list of all the problems that were going on in the country. And he presented them all in one sentence to show, look at all the stuff that's happening here, to make it seem like it's even more. And then finally, tone would just be the emotion, the mood, the atmosphere that the author's trying to convey. Something serious or grave or comedic or conversational or irreverent, could be anything. But it's worth paying attention to, again, to sort of get the big picture of what the author's going for. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email tonight. I guarantee you I will respond before tomorrow. Other reminders, go to sleep, get some rest, be in a good space for tomorrow. I'm sure you will all do great. See you tomorrow.